Clubhouse has been described as the new kid on the block in the global social networking audio milieu, and it's quickly caught fire with young Namibians and has got them talking too. For those who don't know it, it's an audio app that allows up to 5,000 people to get together to communicate in various voice chat rooms. There are all kinds of conversations on a huge variety of topics happening at any given time, from virtual clubbing to book club chats to discussions around race and identity. And with me today to talk about this new phenomenon in the world of social media is Tutaleni Asino, Associate Professor in Educational Technology at the Oklahoma State University in the United States, and one of the first few young Namibians who took to this platform with alacrity and who regularly moderates discussions himself. So welcome to Tutaleni at this horrible hour of the morning on your side via Zoom, and thanks so much for joining me in the second episode of the second season of the NMT's Free Speak podcast, where we talk about all things media.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm glad to be able to talk with you.
Thank you again, Tutaleni. So while I was doing some background on this podcast, I was surprised to read that Clubhouse was launched in March 2020 in the US as an invite-only community of mainly venture capitalists. Elon Musk apparently popped up on the forum and seemed to help popularize this app. It was only in July this year that it was opened up to anyone who wanted to gain access. So you were one of those young Namibians who got onto it early. What, Tutaleni, initially captured your interest about the Clubhouse app?
For me, it was a variety of reasons. One, because of my work around mobile devices, I was originally drawn to it. And then also because of the aspect of it being an audio only, which meant that it was a little bit more accessible since it would not require a lot of bandwidth.
Right.
I've always been captivated by audio only platforms, and also because the importance of audio and storytelling in an African context. So I just really thought that it was going to be an important and game changer application in the context that I'm interested in.
Okay.
So that was really one of the things that drew me to it initially.
Right. And obviously, yes, you got onto it fairly soon. But Tutaleni, perhaps for the benefit of some who may listen to this podcast who may not know, once they've downloaded the Clubhouse app on their cell phones, where do they go from there? And perhaps give us an idea of what's on offer in terms of discussions in the Namibian house, as it's known.
The Clubhouse app is relatively easy to use, because once you download the app and you open it, you are presented with a variety of topics that you can choose from. And underneath all those different topics, there are different groups that you can join that focus on those topics, which are called clubs.
Right.
And underneath each of those clubs, there is different rooms that you can join. So, for example, in our context, we created the Namibia House Club.
Right.
And underneath that club, we have a variety of topics that we cover. So just a quick overview, we would have things like on Sunday, we'll have people who are interested in religion. We'll have maybe a hymn session.
Okay.
And then on Monday, we'll have a room that focuses on Namibian scholarships, much more of an academic-oriented room. And then we'll have a mental health room. We'll have jobs and career. We'll have our main hall room, which Gwen, you were a part of, which would basically highlight national related topics in the country.
Okay.
So at this point, we started off really with only about 6 or so people, and it was just a few of us who were drawn to this, and it has just ballooned to now where we have well over 11,000 Namibians on the app.
Wow.
And because we have grown so much, you now have all different kind of rooms that are popping up. in any different topic, whether you're interested in entrepreneurship, whether you're interested in music, or even someone had a room of just playing video games, or DJ playing music. One of the things that I was very proud of in the last few months, we started doing a lot more of health topics,
Right.
especially around when we were noticing that there were just not enough people being safe around COVID or taking the vaccines.
Okay.
So we would bring in doctors. So we had the first lady, and we have Dr. Haufiku and so many others coming in. And then whenever a new topic comes up that is much more of national oriented, like for example, when our two athletes were banned from competing in the 400 meters, we had someone from the Ministry of Youth come in and discuss this. So the goal for a lot of what we do in Namibia House Club really is to inform, and then bring in experts in that area to have those kind of conversation. So it has really grown so much that we are now, I think, at the point where just about any topic is being covered in the Namibia House.
Right. And I gather the one with the athletes was a very popular one. But, Tutaleni, maybe just to ask, because again, we talk about the Namibian Clubhouse app, but that doesn't mean that other people on the global spectrum can't join in, right?
No, they and this is the other reason why I stuck with it, and why it's such a big draw is initially the first few months, that Elon Musk being on the app, when
Right.
they first launched it, you would have people like Elon Musk, people like Oprah, people like Bill Gates coming on
Mm-hmm.
to really generate momentum and attention to it. The thing that I found interesting about the Namibia House specifically is that it's Namibians all around the globe. Whether you're located in the US, whether you're in Europe, whether you're
Okay.
in Canada, it's everywhere. But you can also join tons of rooms for people anywhere. At this point, I think just about anywhere on the planet where there's a cell phone signal, you can find somebody on Clubhouse and you can communicate with. And it's even more evident now around the Olympics when they introduce a feature where you can put your flag there. So
Okay.
you can actually be in the room and see multiple flags to see where people are coming from. So it's really a great network app where you can get in touch with anybody just from anywhere.
Yeah, it's just as I say, I find it. I've been on once or twice, but I really find it quite incredible in some ways, and that's leads me to the next question to you, which is, why do you think somehow that this has developed into such a powerful networking tool among Namibians? I mean, we're talking only audio here. So, do you think it complements other social media platforms such as Facebook and Twitter or Instagram? Or do you think the youth are looking for alternatives to those long established sites? I've always been told the youth like visuals. And of course, here we have an app which is only audio. What do you think? Why is it caught on like this?
I think part of the reason for me the Clubhouse is popular is that, for example, if you look at places like Twitter, it's very much unidirectional. You post your information, and perhaps somebody can come back later and respond. It's not synchronous. The joy of Clubhouse is that you're in the space, someone says something, and you have really a conversation. Very much like being on the telephone.
Right,
And there's also, I think, that appeal of, you know, I'm not so sure how. I think that the visual medium has been a little bit exhausting in a lot of ways,
right.
because there's a lot of pretense that you have to put on when you can, when there's a visual medium involved. So I think it has a little bit of a lower buy-in in a lot of ways, and also that there is no in social media research we call a lot of these Twitter media where you can have an emotional hit and run, where you post something and you run away from it, no matter how offensive it is. In
Exactly.
Clubhouse, that's a little bit different.
Right,
You can't do that. If I say something offensive to you, Gwen, you call me out right then and there.
right.
So it just provided a little bit of a different venue, and I think also the way it was introduced, it seemed to be a little bit more constructive. In the Namibia House, for example, our principles are very much basic. Is that if you're not being respectful in this space, we ask you to leave. If you're in a room or on stage where you're being offensive to somebody, we tell you to leave the stage. That of course does not mean that we censor people, and it does not mean that we don't have complicated conversations. But I think it just provided an opportunity for people to really interact much more in real time than something like Facebook would or Twitter would.
Right. And also, that was actually led into what I wanted to ask you next, to Tutaleni, which is whether you think it's possible to keep these standards high on Clubhouse, so that it doesn't deteriorate into mudslinging like much of the rest of social media. Or do you think things are pretty much in the hands of the moderator as to whether he or she allows participants to trade insults or indulge in hateful speech and other negatives? I believe there were problems of hate speech in the early stages of Clubhouse, which is why the content moderation guidelines were introduced. And of course, on the other hand, I guess anyone can set up a chat room, so the risks are ever present of things getting out of hand. Or what are your
Yeah.
thoughts?
No, it really is up to the moderators to be able to guide the conversation, and I think it was easier to abide by principles when it was really a small group. And even we're finding that in the Namibia House that the more people we have on there, the more it grows. And now it's not just the Namibia House on Clubhouse. We have other Namibians starting up multiple clubs as well.
Exactly.
Um, and some of those has been a blowback against some of the principle that we have put in, because we're like, no, we're not going to allow you to have this kind of insult to each other in our space. And
Right.
people have said, no, well, you can't censor us or control us. We want to have all these type of other talks on our own. So there is a lot of different clubs where I just don't even want to be in it, because there's a
Right.
lot of these, like you said, mudslinging, and it is going to be incredibly tough, because once the app was opened up to Android users, which are much more of a larger audience than iPhone users, the number just grew exponentially. It is going to be very difficult to keep to those standards.
Exactly. And, I've noticed on my own Twitter feed, in response to a tweet I put out a few days ago, just to say, how it's important to inform your own opinions and so on before you tweet or express yourself on social media, the blowback was immediate.
Mhm.
Among some youth who say they felt freedom of expression means that anything goes and they can say whatever they like, no matter how insightful or hurtful to others.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you kind of a two-pronged question, whether you think this kind of viewpoint is very prevalent among younger people, and also on Clubhouse itself. Are you aware if there's any kind of central-based moderation of the choice of topics and content of discussion? I mean, the nice thing is that all these various chat rooms provide users with lots of choices, but it
Mhm.
also does provide opportunity for entrenching regressive views and disinformation, be it anti vaccination groups or 5G conspiracy theories, and so on. What are your thoughts on that, Tutaleni?
There's I think I've seen a development of a view of what freedom of speech mean to some people, where people equate freedom of speech from freedom of responsibility.
Right,
uh, and just wanting to say whatever you want, and even if you're not informed. I was reading a book, I think about last month. I think the author is Tom Nichols, on the death of expertise, where anyone thinks that just because they have an opinion, it should be on the same level as someone who's an expert.
right,
I have a doctorate, but I'm not a medical doctor, so I'm not going to be claiming to know more about cancer than somebody who is actually a specialist on oncology.
exactly.
And there is a lot of that, especially at the early stages, where you just have people coming in and giving tons of advice, and that they just really don't know much about. So in our description of our club, we have one of the rule that says, be able to distinguish opinions from facts.
Right.
And there's a lot of people out there really giving advice that are so harmful to a lot of people. We had a doctor on there who once was in the room saying, "Well, I'm not getting vaccinated because I have a gas tank in my office, and I just don't think that vaccination is really important for me because I have my own gas tank anyway and
Wow.
oxygen tank." And that was a really harmful thing because, yeah, maybe he has it, but as a doctor, you have a responsibility to not tell people to do things that are harmful to them. And I think that's going to be really difficult. The thing that I've seen though evolve on this is that just as much as you have people who are peddling in misinformation, you now also a lot of people who are in the space who can challenge them right away, who can say, no, I don't think that's the case because you have doctors on there, you have various experts who are just on the same platform as well. But there really is, I think I see that much more on Twitter and Facebook, where people are able to post their information unchallenged. Whereas in Clubhouse, I think because it's a real live platform, you have that, but it's still not immune for it. And as the app continues to develop, I think it's going to be very challenging to be able to sustain that. But I think also what I've noticed is just as many as clubs that, for example, in the Namibia House have spun off because they were unhappy with us telling them that no, that's not right, those spaces tend to not last long because people
Okay.
are smart. They tend to say, well, you know what? You can only fool them so many times before they push back and say, no, this is not going to work for us. So there is a lot of that misinformation. There is a lot of freedom from responsibility, where people think that they can say whatever they want and they're not going to be held accountable. But I think that's not just a Clubhouse situation. I think it's in
In
all
general.
spaces.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I mean, I think you've hit the nail on the head that one of the best ways to combat disinformation or hate speech and all these negatives is really to counter with the facts. So, of
Yes.
course, one hopes that Clubhouse is going to conquer, if you like, that negative space that seems to exist in so much of social media. Just to go into the actual Clubhouse app itself, it seems that unlike podcasts, which I do fairly regularly, but which I must say the medium itself doesn't seem to have caught on very much with Namibians, at least not as far as I can establish. Clubhouse discussions are not archived or recorded. They're discarded by the creators as soon as the conversations have ended. And obviously, individual users will find ways and means of recording them on their phones and so on. But do you think the fact that Clubhouse kind of is there and then it goes away is part of its attraction, or is this in actual fact a drawback? In other words, you can never go back to it and say, "Oh, I want to listen to that conversation on that happened on Best Books in Namibia" or something like that, but you can't find it because it's gone.
Yeah, no, that's both the appeal and the drawback. We regularly get requests to record sessions, and at the initial stage, Clubhouse had a moratorium on recording. It was very clear that if you record it, you'll be removed from the app.
Okay.
And now I think that has been lax. That when you record, you have to have permission from everybody in the room.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and the challenge of that is that when you have people coming in and out, it's really hard to have that permission from everybody. So a lot of people have started doing it, and the way they get away from that, or rather they get around the permission issue, is that they put in the title of the session that is going to be recorded, so that when you enter, you know that you're going into a room that's being recorded. We only have one session that has been recorded on Maybe House, for example. We have a culture corner that happens every other Saturday.
Okay.
And the culture corner is where we have people coming in to talk in their own languages. There's at the Benzi who's at UNAM, I believe, who specializes in Awambo cultures.
Okay.
And he comes in multiple times on Saturday and just talk about everything from wedding traditions, funeral traditions, and so on. We also now have rooms in the Chiherero that are coming in to speak about their cultures. And those are recorded. And the reason for that how we get away from that is that Tatembezi himself uh, indicated when he was first invited that, look, I get these kind of requests all the time from people, and I really would like to be able to record my session so I can put them on YouTube and have
Okay.
people come back to and listen at a later time. So so in that case, the moderator actually go to his house and records him there in his house rather than on the app, and then
Okay.
that's posted. So there's a lot of way to get around it, and people are doing that. But I think there's also part of that appeal where one, it almost becomes appointment television in the olden days before there was a digital recording for television, where if you miss it, you miss it. It doesn't come back. So there's an appeal of that you want to be in the room, in the space when it's happening live. But there is, I would have loved to have an opportunity to record some of those COVID conversations, for example, and be
Absolutely.
able to put them live. Even just the session we had with you and your book, the amount of historical context you're able to offer on Namibian history. It would be right. It would have been great to be able to record some of those. For us, sometimes it is incredibly time consuming to be able to record as many of these sessions. And
Right.
most of the people who are on the Clubhouse, um, I don't know of anybody who's doing Clubhouse full time. It's usually people who are at work, they're in between lunch or after work and things like that. So I think it has, as you rightly put it, it has both appeals and drawbacks as well.
The fact that you can or can't do that, yes. And then we'll see, as you said earlier, how the app develops going forward and what people really want from it.
Hmm.
Just a reminder to our listeners that you're listening to the NMT's Free Speak podcast, where we talk about all things media. Tutaleni, I should have perhaps mentioned earlier that perhaps some people, again, those who are not familiar with Clubhouse, should be reminded that this is all about verbal interaction, and it really gives one the choice of simply listening in. In other words, you don't need to speak unless you want to, and or you can participate in any given discussion, usually by giving a show of hand. But either way, you can tune in, so to speak, to participate, especially in discussions on one's areas of interest. Perhaps there, just a quick question, and I think you've kind of answered it. But so far, what do you think have been the most popular talking points in the Namibia House so far? The athletes issue, was that top of the spectrum, so to speak?
The athlete issue was definitely top of the issue, top session. We had a lot of great people there. The one that was surprising to me was definitely the culture corner. The culture corner had I think over 1,000 people in the room
Wow.
just for over 3 hours, really listening to just traditions of how do you get married, how do you propose, how do you take somebody home. That was really massive. We had also a session on the red line, which really also had a lot of participation
Okay.
on that. We also had an issue around the two children that were denied Namibian papers, citizenship papers.
Right.
That was incredibly um, a big room as well, and the health rooms are really um, uh, have been getting a lot of attention as well.
Okay,
I
that's a
think really
great
the
positive. Yeah.
exactly, and I think the big appeal here is for me in the Namibian context. I don't know of another platform that allows um, people, especially young Namibians, an opportunity that level of experts access. where you can go into a room and ask the first lady, why weren't you vaccinated?
Exactly.
That kind of open access is just not as readily available in a lot of spaces. And I think I see that popping up a whole lot more. I think Namibians are making use of multiple modalities as well. And I think a lot of Facebook lives are happening. Twitter sessions are also happening live now. But I think there's a lot of at this point now. I think we average in any session well over 100 to 200 people in the topics that we have had there. But it's really, but the health issues and the hot topics that are coming up on a given day, I think those have been really full as well.
Okay, it'll be great to monitor going forward, because it seems to me there's a kind of a lot of people like the sort of controversy, if you like, about news events that are happening. But it's also
Yeah.
very positive that you say there's a lot of interest in the culture discussions. And, ultimately, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, maybe in some of these chat rooms, as we've referred earlier, there will always be those people who are coming on board simply to stir things up and so on. But ultimately, with well moderated chat rooms, I'm wondering whether that's not actually a good contribution to media literacy and teaching people that you really can be part of a conversation, but to do so in a way that is not, upsetting others in that discussion and so on. And I think, I'm hoping that, that is going to rise to the top. Tutaleni, you also just mentioned, and I think I just wanted to touch on it, the fact that Clubhouse isn't, it's probably the first of its kind, but it's not unique. There are a lot of, you could call them imitators or competitors to Clubhouse, and you've mentioned some of them. I think Twitter Spaces, I believe Spotify has what is called a green room, and
Mhm.
Facebook is said to be launching live audio rooms. Do you think Clubhouse is going to kind of stay on top of the of the heap, so to speak, or are there others providing some serious competition?
I think there's others providing serious competition, especially because they have a much more established system. I think Twitter, if they decide to go after Clubhouse, they could do it. And since it was launched, Clubhouse has also slowed down a little bit, in my opinion, in terms of innovating. Right now, they have introduced a chat feature where you can send a direct message to people in the room, which has been very helpful because
Okay,
for example, we had a room last week on HIV/AIDS. And we all had other rooms on different cancers, and people are not always comfortable talking about topics of health. And
okay,
they can send a message to us, and we can read out the question.
okay,
So that was a new feature, but until now they really haven't had many other ways to innovate. So, for example, the thing that frustrates me as being a club founder is that there's not many permissions. So I have administration right,
okay,
and I can open a room and unlock it to everybody else. Anyone else who's not an admin can open a room under the club, but it's usually locked.
okay,
So if somebody wants their room to be open, they'll have to message me, and I open it up. And obviously, that's just not really efficient, because if they had multiple roles that people can have under the club, that would open it up a lot more. So, but I think it's going to be difficult for them to sustain it unless they continue to innovate. And as you go on, they're gonna have to address ways to deal with misinformation, because there's really
sure,
no central requirement from them as a moderator. It's really
right,
more as an individual club. You get to say, no, this is the rules that we have in our space. But now, if somebody does something that is illegal on the platform, and if those things become more, Clubhouse will have to figure out a way to deal with what is their responsibility in that space. But I think organizations that have been around for a long time, like Facebook, like Twitter and so forth. They're trying to figure out ways to do exactly what Clubhouse is doing to take away from that profit. But on the other hand, in the technology, emerging technology space, a lot of these companies develop apps that become popular and then wait to be bought out by big companies.
Exactly.
WhatsApp is an example of that got bought out by Facebook, for example. So
Right.
it'd be interesting to see going down whether or not investors come in and say, no, we're going to support Clubhouse to grow further, or maybe Twitter will say, no, you're really cutting into our business model, and we want to
Right.
buy you out. But as you noted with other spaces, there are a lot of other companies that are really coming for Clubhouse and doing similar things, and it'll be interesting to see how um, the innovation continues under Clubhouse. And also,
Right.
just lastly, in terms of what the audience decide, if people start seeing that the place is much more toxic, they're not going to go back to it.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot of, it's really really early for the app at this point. It'll be interesting to even see just next year how it grows.
Yeah, the other thing is, of course, I don't want to, it sounds a bit cynical, but sometimes I think that's the whole appeal of some social media is exactly the toxicity, because you often find it's exactly in those areas where the most people gravitate. But we're hoping that will change in the future, because I'm also thinking if someone said something highly defamatory in one of the chat rooms, where do we kind of take it from there? I mean, if that happens on Facebook or Twitter, or even if you delete the tweet or the post, there's always someone who took a screenshot to kind of prove what was said and to enable the person who's been vilified to kind of take legal action if they so choose. Whereas on Clubhouse, of course, if the conversation's disappeared, it will be difficult to prove that, in fact, that was said. But Tutaleni, as we move towards the last question or two, and thank you again for your time, I just saw a PC Mag review of Clubhouse where they used the following phrase: "What if Twitter was a podcast you lived inside of?" It's also been described, and you mentioned that yourself, as listening in on a phone call. Another is that like it's Zoom without a video. Would you like to comment briefly on these descriptions?
Yes, I think um, actually, before I even get on that, let me follow up with something that you said earlier, because there was an incident on Clubhouse where even though the recording does disappear, the Clubhouse creators themselves, I think they still have some of those
Okay,
recordings
they
on their own
cache a
servers.
copy, right?
Yeah, and
Right.
there have been people who have actually been kicked off the platform because they have said in inflammatory things. So what happens is that if someone says something that is inappropriate or offensive to you, you can definitely file a complaint with the application, and they do investigate that
Okay.
and remove people. But to go back, I really like that PC Mag description. I usually use to describe Clubhouse as an interactive podcast,
Right. Right.
and I think really that is what was missing from a lot of these spaces, that constant interaction. And in Clubhouse, you can sit there and listen. Like I think you said earlier, you can just be in the audience, and if you want to ask a question, come up. But you can easily just be sitting there and listen to it while you're doing whatever else you're doing. I usually sometime would have it on while I'm making dinner, for example,
Okay.
and it's just in the background. But I think it's really that interactivity that grows and that forces people to do it. I used to be on Twitter. We used to run Twitter chats for
Right.
education,
Right.
and those were a little bit popular to start off with, but they fell off because it requires you to participate much more actively,
Exactly.
and you have to, someone asks a question, you have to sit there and type and go back, and you have to rush with time because each question lasts only so long. So there was just a little bit more work that required you to do. You couldn't do that if you were, if you're driving from work, you can plug in your phone in your car speakers and be able to listen to Clubhouse if you want to do that, or you can be talking just like you're on the phone. So you are really living in an interactive podcast, and I think that's really one of the draw for it.
Exactly. And I mean, when you really think of it, it's a bit like radio, isn't it? We all
Yeah.
know that radio remains probably the most important media on our continent,
Hmm.
and it's still very popular. And this is like having, chat radio, talk radio, where
Yeah.
you can actually participate or you can listen and you can have it on in the background, as you say, while you're cooking dinner.
Yeah.
So, Tutaleni, I'd love to talk longer, but I'm coming to the last question in terms of timing, and that is this going to be just another talking shop? I mean, I think even though there may be very interesting conversations happening on the app, do you think that's just where it's going to end? That people are just going to talk and talk and talk? And I mean, there's positivity in that too. But do you also think that it ultimately has the capacity to kind of make a difference to lives and livelihoods here in Namibia and elsewhere? And I'm really thinking of how we can translate what is happening through this audio app into real life, so to speak, and whether you think it might spawn some kind of innovation and creativity and even money making prospects for a lot of Namibians who are going onto the app.
I do. That's a question that I get asked a lot, especially with regards to Namibia House. I think Advocate Beans Khawanas was the one who
Right,
put it. Said, what is your mission? What is you guys are working well together for the Namibia House, but what is the overall mission? What are you trying to achieve?
right,
And at the initial stage, really for me, the appeal was just like, I'm always driven by conversations. My background is in communication, and sort of conversations are really important for me. And I was interested in the fact that there were just certain conversations that I liked that weren't being had, and Clubhouse provided a space for that.
right.
So the impact question for me, the way that I have made sense of it now is that it's not really just talk because impact is really happening.
Sure.
Um, you know, just an example around COVID. When we had those sessions, there are people who actually went to get vaccinated as a result of those sessions.
Okay.
Because initially it was easy for us to dismiss and say, no, people are just caught up in all these fake news and all these, fear mongering things. But what we found is that as much as there were those people, there were some who really had legitimate concerns. Someone who would come on and say, you know what, I have a baby and I'm breastfeeding. Can I still get the vaccine?
Exactly.
And that person did not have a doctor that they can have that conversation with. Someone say, you know what, I'm taking, my HIV/AIDS medication. What's the interaction with this? Will this still help me? Or would this cause major health issues? And people were able to have those conversations addressed. We have issues around cancer that people are able to come in and ask. So I think those conversations are having significant impact on people. For me, as far as the original mission and goal of being on Clubhouse, I'm satisfied with that. If I can have somebody have a question that I've had for the longest time answered by an expert that they weren't able to have access to, that for me is impact. And as far as also in terms of making money, Clubhouse is experimenting with ways to allow people to get money for that. So on my account, for example, if you go on Clubhouse, there's a little pay button where you can actually give money contribution, and they're rolling that out around the world as well.
Okay.
We had people who have gotten jobs from Clubhouse, whether it's contracts for photography or contract for mentorships and web design and all these type of things. So I think people are really finding ways to monetize it, And I think impact is really happening in this space as well. I think for me, I've always pushed back when people say no, this is just conversation happening, because there's a lot of um, things that are happening in that space. I was doing a project at Namtoni School in Karutura, and I was working with students with mobile devices, and I'd given them mobile devices to ask each other questions about entrepreneurship and science, and they were doing all this recording and really having fun doing it. And a few teachers walked by and said, "Ah, man, these guys are just having fun. They're not even learning anything."
Right.
And my pushback to that is that people really miss the bigger picture. And the bigger picture there is that these students had to figure out a way to ask scientific questions to each other. They had to figure out a way to create these recordings and edit them and so on. There's a lot of cognitive processes that are happening from an educational standpoint in there that someone just dismisses it as just having fun or just talking. And for me, it's really similar to Clubhouse, because there's a lot of people who are getting advice on, we have a financial literacy room that happens every Sunday, a road to financial freedom. We had questions on how to write a will, and end of life estate planning and so on.
Real
A lot of those things
practical
you're just
stuff.
not
Yeah.
able to have in other spaces. So I think really impact is happening, but I think what it's also doing is problematizing what impact is and what it looks like. And it's having impact in the way that perhaps we're not accustomed to. But I'm curious to see how that impact grows, and I hope people can really monetize it further and make a living out of it.
Tutaleni, I think that's absolutely fascinating and a wonderful note on which to end this podcast. So great to hear that there is such a lot of potential through this app, and indeed such a lot of positivity. And not least of all, I think great debate and discussion is something we really need. So, again, there's that contribution, I think, to media literacy. And I'm so pleased to hear of some of the really practical aspects where you think this has made a difference in people's lives. And may I finally suggest that it also seems as though this app, unlike Twitter, for example, is a non-elitist medium. In other words, people out there in the far-flung rural areas and so on, you've said already it requires little bandwidth, can also log on to some of these discussions and gain access to information, which of course is a big thing to me, to help them in their daily lives and to make them more participatory and empowered citizens in our Namibia. So, Tutaleni, I'm going to thank you so much for giving us your time today. And without further ado, a last remark from you, and then I'm going to let you go back to sleep.
No, thank you, Gwen, for the opportunity. I think you really summed it up well in terms of the other potential impact, especially around media literacy. For me, one of the things that it reminded me of, my first very academic paper that I had that was published was on the time that the Namibian created messages, SMS to the editor, to the editor, instead of
Right.
letters to the editor. And I spoke about that, how that really opened up the country in terms of participating in public dialogue, where someone can say, we don't have this happening in our village, and a government official can read that and say, okay, let's actually address that concern. And I think Clubhouse for me in the Namibian context is very similar, because I was, last month I was up north in Okahao participating in Clubhouse just in the same exact way that I'm doing it here from Oklahoma. So it really does enable so many people to participate in a lot of ways. There is, of course, we were also able to see there's some limitations, because connectivity is a massive issue
Exactly.
in Namibia as well.
Right.
And we had a minister once on there who was in Rundu and having connectivity issues. Uh, to talk on Clubhouse, and he was really just highlighting what regular everyday people are having as well. So I really think it's a massive opportunity for Namibians to take up space. My drive for getting on earlier was that Namibia has often been left out in all of these emerging platforms until
Absolutely,
later,
yeah.
and we didn't want to be the last one. So we jumped on very early because we wanted to say, you know what, let's claim a space and make use of it. And it's evolving as we go. And I'm really looking forward to see what people make of it. And I'm excited every time I see more Namibian clubs coming on Clubhouse, because we are just continuing to take up space. And I hope we use that space responsibility, that responsible way. So I thank you for the opportunity to talk about this, because I really think it's a space that is important in a lot of ways, and it's only starting to emerge. So thank you.
Thank you, Tutaleni. All the best, and take care, and see you on Clubhouse or hear you on Clubhouse in the future. Thanks a lot.
Sounds great.